Hello, my friends, how are you? Tonight, we are sailing into a world where one of the most ancient civilizations in history never fell, changing the course of the world with its own power. I am Kwame, an inventor and explorer from the Ashanti Kingdom. We know that the history of Africa was written by the West's colonies. But what if that dark age had never happened? We are now stepping into those forgotten days, into a world where Africa embraced technology and science. Are you ready? Then get comfortable, because this journey will be much more surprising and filled with science than you think. Don't forget to like and share your own what-if scenarios. I am Kwame, an artisan belonging to the blacksmith guild of the Ashanti Kingdom in the lush green lands of Ghana. Our ancestors had passed down the secrets of ironwork for centuries through oral traditions and practice. Swords, plows, ornamental jewelry, all came from the fire of our forge. Yet, my mind was not solely occupied with forging iron. I would often ponder how the water beneath the hearth turned to steam and violently lifted its heavy lid. This seemingly ordinary but immensely powerful event became a source of inspiration for me. The idea of harnessing this power for the service of humanity by understanding the rhythm and cycle of nature completely seized my mind. That idea would make us a civilization that rose with the subtlety of science, rather than the brute force of the West. While Europe was grappling with the darkness of civil wars and feudalism, we had already taken the first steps of a technological revolution. The dark era that Europeans called the scramble for Africa never happened for us. When I presented this primitive prototype to the king of Ashanti, it was a turning point for me that he did not see this invention as merely a war machine. The king, after a long look at the prototype made of shining iron, said with a wise expression, "This will be used not to destroy our enemies, but to bring prosperity to our people." His vision was to use technology not just for power, but for social welfare and harmony with nature. This decision, unlike the Industrial Revolution in the West, ensured that our revolution was not based on slave labor and exploitation. By the king's order, new science, workshops and schools were established all over the country. Instead of war, we taught our children how steam engines worked and how to process iron more efficiently. We approached technology in harmony with nature, preserving our ethical values. This was proof that the respect for technology of the Egyptian civilization had also spread to our civilization. The Industrial Revolution began with Ashanti's sustainable use of its natural resources, especially coal and gold, rather than a colonial mindset. This did not lead to environmental disasters as in the West. Industrialization in Africa, unlike in Europe, was based more on wood and local metals rather than coal and iron. Our blacksmiths took the art of ironworking to the next level, and these new metals allowed us to build stronger bridges and contributed to the more efficient operation of our steam engines. Industry was like an extension of nature, cooperating with it rather than harming it. One of the most fundamental principles of our Industrial Revolution was to respect the rhythm of nature. This meant that, unlike in the West, we industrialized by preserving our environment. Ashanti's technological progress also transformed our relations with other African kingdoms. Using steamship technology, we established trade networks on major rivers such as the Nile, Congo, and Niger. The interior regions of the continent were connected by steamships. This allowed not only trade, but also cultural exchange to increase. I, as an explorer, while traveling on steamships, was observing how different African tribes and kingdoms were coming together and forming a new continental identity. This showed that Africa was establishing its own internal unity before the arrival of the Europeans. When European merchants arrived on the coasts of Africa in the early 18th century, They encountered powerful kingdoms with advanced technology and modern weapons instead of primitive tribes. Instead of fighting us, they had to establish diplomatic relations and learn our technology. Ashantis, steamships, and modern rifles thwarted the colonial ambitions of the Europeans from the very beginning. Our king had said to the European envoys, "You are guests in our lands, you are merchants, but you are never masters." These words showed that Africa had taken its place in history not as a colony, but as a superpower. As a scribe who witnessed this conversation, I was seeing how the course of history was changing in an instant. I remember, as if it were yesterday, the times when the European kingdoms watched our rapid progress with anxiety. They were still grappling with the chaos created by feudal principalities and endless religious wars. Since we had control over our trade routes, our riches and those of the East were not reaching them. That's when I saw European merchants and diplomats starting to come to the coasts of Africa. However, this was not an invasion attempt with swords, but a visit filled with curiosity. Scientists from England, France, and Portugal, armed with notebooks and measuring instruments instead of swords and rifles, were applying to our academies to learn our technology. It was a source of irony and pride for me to know that they once saw us as primitive. They understood the power of our civilization, and we taught them to use science and technology for peace, not for war. For our industrialized African kingdoms, the slave trade based on human labor was both economically unprofitable and unethical. Steam-powered machines could do the work of hundreds of slaves alone in the fields and mines. This new technology not only increased production, but also eliminated the economic basis of slavery. Instead of establishing a colonial order like in the West, African leaders united to ban the slave trade throughout the continent. The Ashanti Navy, with its steamships, patrolled the Atlantic, forming a united front against European ships that engaged in the slave trade. The waters that were once swarming with the slave ships of the West were now the waters of freedom and justice. This was not just an economic revolution, but also a moral awakening. With the Industrial Revolution, our African cities grew rapidly. Old centers such as Timbuktu, Axum, and Great Zimbabwe were transformed into modern industrial and commercial cities. As an architect, while planning these cities, I was laying the foundations not only for buildings, but also for a new social structure. The factories were built by considering the welfare and safety of the workers, instead of dirty and crowded ghettos like in the West. We were building clean and orderly neighborhoods for our workers. In these new cities, a new social structure was formed where everyone rose according to their talent and hard work, and knowledge and productivity were esteemed instead of nobility. The most remarkable feature of industrialization in Africa was its development with a philosophy of harmony with nature. We were horrified when missionaries and merchants from the West told us how the factories in Europe polluted the air and rivers and destroyed forests. Our ancient wisdom taught us that nature is not just a resource, but also a life partner. For this reason, we installed systems in our factories that filtered smoke and developed methods to recycle our waste without harming the soil. Our industry was not a war against nature, like in the West, but a dialogue with it. This made Africa the leader of the world, not only technologically, but also morally. The Industrial Revolution in Africa also brought a cultural renaissance. With the invention of the printing press, our rich legends, epics, and wisdom that had been passed down through oral tradition for centuries were now written down. Scribes and writers like me put these stories into books, and they spread among our people. Literature, art, and philosophy experienced a golden age, blending with the new possibilities brought by technology. Artists from the West were creating new works inspired by our rhythms, colors, and motifs. Europe, which once saw itself as the center of civilization, was now admiring Africa's cultural richness. Along with the Industrial Revolution, not only our cities, but also our governance system was modernized. Our ancient tribal councils were strengthened with a new constitution and laws. Unlike the West, our legal structure was not based on the power of a single person or family. Justice was established through a common mind in confederation councils where all tribes and communities were represented as Kwame. I attended these meetings as an advisor. We addressed the new problems brought by industry, such as workers' rights, environmental regulations, and urban planning with these new laws. Our governance model was designed to be a blend of technology and ancient wisdom, where every individual's voice could be heard. This made Africa a stable power, not only economically, but also politically. In my childhood, I only dreamed of becoming a blacksmith. However, the Industrial Revolution expanded these dreams. Education became the most important pillar of our new world. Science and technology were placed at the center of all schools. Now, every child not only learned to read and write, but also took lessons in steam mechanics, chemistry, and engineering. Girls and boys were educated together, and the most talented were admitted to the academy. As a teacher, I was raising the new generation of inventors and engineers. Knowledge was not the monopoly of a single class. It was open to all. This made Africa intellectually a step ahead of the West and a continent that rose with the power of knowledge. The advancements in chemistry and biology brought by the Industrial Revolution were blended with traditional African medicine. Our healers examined the secrets of herbal medicines in the laboratory and developed new treatments with this knowledge. We discovered vaccines and medicines against malaria, cholera, and other epidemic diseases. This extended our average life expectancy and allowed our people to live healthier lives. Our hospitals became not only places for treating diseases, but also research and development centers. When I saw the West sending envoys to learn about our medical innovations, I realized how wrong those who once saw us as primitive were. While the Europeans were busy with their internal conflicts and industrialization efforts, we set out to the oceans. Our steamships discovered new trade routes and continents in the Pacific and Atlantic. African explorers reached the distant lands of Asia and South America, establishing diplomatic and commercial relations with the civilizations there. This made Africa the heart of overseas trade networks. Explorers like me would look not only for gold and spices before setting out, but also for knowledge and culture. Our discoveries, unlike the West's, were not based on colonialism and plunder, but on mutual respect and learning. When I was a young explorer, I had the opportunity to visit the capitals of Europe. What I saw deeply affected me. Europe, which could not experience the Industrial Revolution, was still grappling with feudalism and endless religious wars. Its cities were dirty and its villages were poor. They had become dependent on the technological products of industrialized Africa. They were paying a high price to buy the steam engines, medicines, and communication tools we made. Europe, which once saw itself as the center of civilization, was now like a backward relative of ours. This situation showed us that the power of technology is not just about an invention, but also about how it can change the destiny of a civilization. Along with our Industrial Revolution and technological superiority, the history taught to children in schools also fundamentally changed. Our textbooks did not tell of the discoveries and colonialism of the Europeans, but of the technological achievements, diplomatic victories, and moral superiority of African kingdoms. Our children were not learning about European colonialism, but about their internal wars and backwardness. This showed that Africa had taken on the role of an elder brother, not a subjugated one, in history. We were telling European children how we used our technology and science. This changed Africa's position in history. When we reached the 20th century, the world map and the balance of power were very different from what we know. The superpowers were not the USA and Russia, but African kingdoms like Ashanti, Ethiopia, and Congo, and Asian civilizations like China. The First and Second World Wars were fought with different alliances and outcomes according to this new balance of power. European kingdoms were trying to protect their power by joining our alliances. We were seeing the wars of the Europeans as their own internal affairs and were intervening only through diplomatic means. The space race did not happen between the USA and Russia as in the West, but between the African Union and China. The first ones to step on the moon were our engineers and astronauts. This was proof of Africa's technological superiority and showed the entire world that science and discovery did not belong to a specific race. I couldn't hold back my tears when I watched this moment on television. Africa's flag was waving on the surface of the moon. The world was experiencing a rivalry between Africa's philosophy of technology in harmony with nature and Europe's philosophy of steam and power, instead of ideological conflicts like communism and capitalism. While Europe was using technology only for power and money, we were using it to protect nature and increase the welfare of the people. This started a new philosophical debate throughout the world and was proof of Africa's moral superiority. Africa progressed in its modernization process by preserving its traditional values and cultures. Instead of copying the modernization of the West, we created our own original modernization. Our cities preserved traditional architecture along with modern buildings. Our art and music gained a new identity by blending with technology. As an architect, I was proud to be a part of this unique and original modernization process. And so, friends, our journey into this imaginary world where colonialism never happened and our continent wrote its own destiny has come to an end. If you enjoyed our story, don't forget to like, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe. I wish a good night to everyone who stayed up late with me.